I think one of the most divisive and hotly debated topics in this country, frankly, is gun control versus gun rights. And, here's my thing. I think too often this gets to be way, way too sticky of a topic and way, way too controversial of a debate topic. It really does to me. Here's what I say is that I personally don't like guns. In fact, I think they are frankly a little bit on the stupid side. My opinion, how I view them. I don't like them. Have no desire to have one. May very well never have one. But at the same point in time, I don't feel it's right to sit there because I don't like them, because I don't necessarily agree with them, and I don't think it's right for me to own one. I'm not going to sit there and tell somebody else that they can't own a gun, to protect themselves, their family, their property. I do believe in a fundamental human right to be able to defend oneself and family and property. And how somebody else might choose to do it is frankly their business. And how I choose to do it is frankly my business. I expect to respect that other individual, and I expect that other individual to respect me in the way that I view things. See, a very common sense type of thing. Just because something applies to me doesn't mean it needs to apply to someone else or everyone else. And on the flip side, I expect the same courtesy in return. However, too often with this issue, both sides of this really get caught up in too much bullshit, too much use of fears and emotions and passions, not enough logic and reason and critical thinking, and frankly, flat out common sense. Gun control advocates, I think, get too ridiculous and too caught up. Every time there's a mass shooting, it's the end of the world, and you got to take away this gun, and you got to take away that gun, and it's not really dealing with the fundamental problems or issues. It solves nothing. Again, gets caught up in the extremes, and at the same token, you get the gun right nuts and the gun owner nuts that do the exact same damn thing in a different way. They sit there and talk about they're trying to take this away from us. The government doesn't want us to have our guns. Da 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 da. Too many extremes, not enough common sense here. And when it comes to the whole issue of gun control versus gun rights and gun ownership rights, I think it's important that we ask some key fundamental questions to really understand where we are as a country on this issue and maybe where we should be heading as a country on this issue. Here's the first question. I'll ask a question for the gun control people and then a question for the gun rights people. For the gun control people, does getting rid of guns make everyone safer? If nobody had a gun, does that in any way, shape, or form necessarily guarantee that the country as a whole would be safer? That in any way that would necessarily automatically bring a decrease in gun violence and a decrease in murders in this country every single year? Does that necessarily guarantee that? On the flip side of that, to the gun rights people, does arming everyone make us any safer? Think about that for a second. Do you really want every single able-bodied adult age 18 or over, or let's say 21 or over, carrying a gun? Carrying a weapon that can kill? Does that make us safer? I don't know about that. For the gun control people, do we really need more gun controls? Do we need more gun control laws? Or do we need to enforce the thousands upon thousands of gun control laws and restrictions that are already on the books? Do we need to add more bureaucratic red tape or figure out a way to better navigate the bureaucratic red tape that we already have put in place? For the gun rights people, should there really be no restrictions on guns whatsoever? Should it just be loosey-goosey, where you could sit there and just go to the corner store and fucking buy a Glock, or buy this type of handgun, or buy a Beretta, or buy a sawed-off shotgun? Is that a good thing? Is that really helping anything? For the gun control people, do these sporadic, and I emphasize again sporadic because they do happen sporadically, mass shootings really equal a huge problem? Is it this person kills 8 people, then a few months later this person kills 10 people, a few months later this person might kill 25 or 30 people, then a few months later this person kills 50 people? If it's happening sporadically, which again it is, how big of a problem is that really? This is like the whole thing to me of everybody is so afraid to fly. when statistically flying is way, way, way safer as a means of transportation than travel, as opposed to getting your car and driving on the highway. And that is a fact that nobody will dispute. Yet, when a plane does crash, it tends to be a more spectacular type of thing. It's a rarer occurrence. As a result, it gets more attention, similar to these mass shootings. Should we really be ratcheting up this propaganda and this, this discussion about reining in guns, talking about this being a huge problem if these mass shootings are happening very sporadically? And then on the flip side of that, for the gun rights people, do you really need assault weapons to protect oneself? At some point in time, doesn't enough mean enough? Do you really need something like what, an M16 or an AK-47 or something along those lines? Do you need some type of weapons like that, or do you need assault weapons to really protect yourself? Or would you be able to maybe get by with a handgun and a shotgun? Would that not be enough to make you feel safe in your home? Would that not be enough to allow you to still be able to have your basic human fundamental right to protect oneself, family, and or property? I'm just saying. For the gun control people, are gun control advocates really just puppets here? Are you really getting played by the mass media, knowing that every time one of these mass shootings happens, and like I said, something that does happen on a sporadic basis, tragic and sad, absolutely, when they happen, but again, are sporadic. Are you getting played by the mass corporate-owned, state-run media that sits there and every time one of these things happens, sensationalizes it, knowing that it's going to draw you in, knowing that it's going to increase their ratings, guess what? Their viewership increasing, guess what? Money in the old hashtag ass pocket. Are you getting played here? Are you allowing the narrative to be set for you by, again, the state-run, corporate-owned media that sends the discussion in a certain way in order to what? Again, make more money for the old hashtag ass pocket. And for the gun rights people and the gun rights advocates, just the same. Are you getting played by the mass media? Are you getting played by the NRA and the gun lobbies, where these groups are feeding into your fears and emotions and passions, just like the gun control people, where they're sitting there and saying, it's time to take away your guns, it's time to rein this in, it's time to restrict it, and as a result, you're not smart enough to see through the bullshit, just like the gun control people, frankly, aren't smart enough to see through the bullshit, and as a result, you get sucked in, and what do? You increase your membership into the NRA, you buy more guns, you buy more ammunition, you watch more TV, maybe like a Fox News in your case, and guess what? Everybody is making money off of you at your expense. Ever dawn on either side that you are getting played? Ever dawn on either side that you are just puppets in a great game, a great scheme, all in the name of making more money? I mean, here's some common sense conclusions that I come to. And in my next video in this Stupid America series, I'll actually give you some common sense gun rights or gun control proposals, laws, things that I would like to see done. But just some common sense conclusions about this whole thing. Eliminating all guns flat out isn't the answer. Some countries will sit there and talk about we don't have the right to own guns and that's great and that. But just because it works somewhere else is not a guarantee in any way, shape, or form that it will or won't work here. It could be a great thing. It could be an epic disaster. And after over 200 plus years of people having the right to be able to own guns, would taking that right completely away really solve anything? Or taking most of that right away really solve anything? In fact, it could create more problems than it would actually solve. And then on the flip side, for the gun rights people, arming everybody sure as hell isn't the answer either. Do you want a bunch of mentally imbalanced people sitting there and freaking being able to go to a gun show and buy a couple of handguns and a couple of shotguns and maybe a couple AKs? Is that really the answer? Is that really helping anybody? Is that really making this a safer country? I don't think it is, and I don't think you can sit there and say it. You can spin me on this bullshit of, it doesn't matter because it's about the right. No, at some point in time, dipwads, and this again goes for both sides, you need to use some logic, use some rationale, use some critical thinking skills, and use some goddamn common sense here. Taking away all guns isn't the answer in this particular country. I'm only speaking about this particular country. And arming everybody sure as fucking hell isn't going to be the damn answer. Do you want this to be the shoot 'em up, bang bang, Wild West again? We did that before. That wasn't very good. It was a disaster. Everybody had a gun. This whole logic of the only way to stop a good guy with or bad guy with the gun is a good guy with the gun. Oh, that would seem to work great in theory until you look at what happened in the Wild West. You had duels. People were shooting each other all the fucking time. How did that work? How safe were the times back then? Do we really want that again today in the 21st century? I think not. Also, in terms of common sense conclusions, we need to better enforce the current laws that are on the books. Not be sitting there and subtracting away from them. Not be sitting there and adding a bunch more bureaucracy and a bunch of bullshit laws to the books. Let's work on the things that we do have in place. Get these measures to work for us, to make sure that people that should be owning guns own guns, people that shouldn't be owning guns not owning guns, penalizing and punishing strongly the people that illegally own these damn guns. We need to better enforce what we've already got in place. Don't be taken away from it. Don't sit there and add to it. Better enforce those things first and then find out which direction you need to go, whether you stay the same, you add to it, or you could take away from it. But if you're not doing the things you're already doing right, why do you think adding or subtracting from it is going to make any fucking difference whatsoever? Again, all it's going to do is make the problem worse, which is exactly what happens in this country, along with so many other things. And the bottom line, again, is this whole thing of, it's a constitutional right, and it's this, and it's that. Well, let's put it this way. Technically, you could argue that it is a constitutional right. But again, let's keep in mind that this was something that was thought of in the 1780s, fresh off of the heels of the Revolutionary War in the United States of America being a British colony. It's a much different time, a much different place. Maybe it is time to update the times and update the Second Amendment, amend the Second Amendment to where it is less vague and it is actually more clear and concise in its language. Because I find it very hard to believe that people in the 1780s, the founding fathers, if you will, could have sat there and envisioned in a world of single-shot muskets things like semi-automatic and fully automatic rifles and assault weapons and machine guns. But also at the same point in time, they understood that maybe having an armed citizen group and armed people was necessary for the health of the country in terms of having a militia at the time where there wasn't a national standing army. You had to be able to have a militia at the colony level, at the state level, that was able to arm and mobilize very quickly. Maybe they understood that that was something necessary too, in part also to prevent from the tyranny of a government, because they had rebelled against and won freedom from the tyranny of another government. Now, you could also look at the Second Amendment and talk about the fact that it calls for a well-regulated militia. Does everybody that owns a gun then need to sign up for the National Guard or the Army Reserves? I mean, if we look at it from a literal standpoint, that kind of seems to be what it would imply. Maybe it's time to revisit the Second Amendment, not repeal it. I would never advocate for repealing it. Not sitting there and trying to strip away from it either. I'm not advocating for that. But modernizing it and making it something that actually fits into the 21st century and beyond, making it maybe a little more specific and a little less vague. And furthermore, for those of you that sit there and say this or they sit there and say that, the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee you the right to assault weapons. There have actually been Supreme Court decisions and opinions written about the fact that just because you can have guns doesn't mean you can have any weapon or every weapon, and nor does that prevent somebody from being able to restrict it to a certain degree. Banning them outright is constitutionally wrong, and that is 100% correct. Now, here's my ultimate thing, is that if it doesn't stop at handguns, and it doesn't stop at shotguns, then what does it go to? Like I said, the AK-47s. Then what does it go to? The fucking assault rifles. And then what does it go to? Oh my God, this guy has a machine gun. Oh my God, this guy has a freaking rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Oh my God, I need a bazooka to freaking protect myself. Oh my God, I need a short-range ballistic missile to protect myself. I need a long-range cannon to protect myself. I need a couple of nuclear bombs to protect myself. Again, at some point in time, when does enough become enough? When do we cross over from, sticking to protecting people's constitutional rights to getting goddamn ridiculous and carried away with shit. You can have your handguns, you can have your shotguns, but what's next? Like I said, bazookas, grenade launchers, cannons, short-range ballistic missiles, nuclear bombs. Where does it stop? At some point in time, both sides of this issue need to realize that enough is enough with the extreme shit. It's time to come up with some common sense solutions to what is, frankly, a real problem facing this country. But I wonder if that'll ever happen, because too often America is more concerned about flexing their superiority and flexing their right and might, and all they end up doing is looking like stupid America.